You might think the days of surplus deals are gone, but I am going to try today to illuminate some good deals on the market, some things to keep an eye on, and a different way to look at surplus deals. Maybe that is enticing to you. If so, hopefully you stay tuned. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, and ballistics the right way, with God at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. Now, I got a military law enforcement background. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. But today we're talking about deals and surplus. Not a huge deal. I guess for that more, I've been, into guns and buying guns for decades. Let's talk about some of the past environments of surplus to get into today's environment of surplus. Obviously, after both world wars, there was a glut of surplus military firearms, especially when you're the victor, as we were in both WW1 and WW2. I like to go and look at older firearms culture. I have, a bunch of magazines from like the 1950s, 70s, different eras. And a lot of those 1950s were really good deals on some surplus stuff. And you might look back and think, those are some really good guns at some really crazy prices. And there were some really good deals. But you got to remember inflation. What those guns cost adjusted for today's inflation. Also, they're really cool now because they're more rare. When the market is flooded with them, people tend to not appreciate them. Not that long ago, if you've been into guns for a couple of decades, it's like the Mosin Nagant. When you could get a Mosin Nagant for $79, nobody thought they were a decent gun. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. After the wars, there were a lot of surplus firearms, obviously, from countries that got defeated or countries that just had a surplus or were going to something more modern, and they were getting rid of their older guns. 1903 Springfields, Enfields, things like that. And then in my lifetime, there was the collapse of the Soviet Union and a bunch of those satellite states vomiting out a bunch of their military arms to get money, which was great for us and great for the American gun buyer. We had the Mosin Nagants, we had the AK variants, we had the SKSs. Well, those have all since dried up. So what is somebody to do that's looking for deals in surplus? Well, I would encourage you to maybe expand your idea of surplus. Okay, so the good deals in surplus that I've been seeing lately are police trade-ins, largely in 40. I know, you guys hear me rag on 40 all the time. I do. It was a horrible choice. It was a horrible decision, brought to you by the F.B.I. Just a horrible abomination of a cartridge. That said, there's still really good deal on 40 pistols. I saw on a website recently police trade in Smith & Wesson M&Ps for $200 and something in 40 Smith & Wesson. I've seen over the past year or two really, really good deals on SIG 229s and 226s in 40 Smith & Wesson. But 40's lame. Agreed, 40 is super lame. There's a couple of things you can do to remedy this. But you got to remember older surplus, like a lot of those guns that we were getting were in weird calibers. 760 by 54R. It's a weird caliber. 9 by 18 Makarov. It's a weird caliber. So this is nothing new to surplus. 303 British. Let's put a rim on it. Way outdated. But you get the idea. 40 Smith & Wesson. You can work with it. One, with the money you're saving, if you've been looking into getting into reloading, you can get into reloading. You can load it to a manageable level where the recoil is not, where you're not, unless you're a masochist, it's going to be okay. You could just simply load it down. Or, load lighter bullets so that the recoil is not a major handicap. I don't care how well you control recoil. I shoot a 40 and I shoot one routinely. I can't stand it. I don't care how good you control recoil. If you reduce it, you control it better. That was one of the main problems with the 40. But if you hand load, you can load it down and control the recoil or make the recoil more manageable. So with the money you're saving, you could get into reloading and reload other stuff and the 40. Also, another thing you could do is get a conversion barrel. I think that 40 Smith & Wesson is an abomination. I like 357 SIG. You can get a 357 SIG conversion barrel or a factory barrel oftentimes. Same magazine, same slide, same everything. And it should work fine. So if you want a cool caliber from a lame caliber with the money you're saving, get one of these and get a 357 SIG barrel. And I just use the Smith & Wesson M&P and the SIG 226, 229s as one example, as a few examples. There are many other guns in 40 that have been vomited out on the surplus market. So you can get a conversion barrel. You can even get sometimes 9mm conversion barrels for decent money. If you're a Glock Kool-Aid drinker, there's a bunch of these in 40 that are trade-ins sometimes that are decent money. And that's one thing you can certainly get spare parts for in conversion barrels. So some of these are really, really good deals. So if you're looking, police trade-ins in 40, sometimes you can find police trade-ins much more rare, but there were some decent-sized agencies that adopted 357 SIG. Sometimes you can find police trade-ins in 357 SIG. But you get the idea. Those 40 caliber police trade-ins, those are a deal in surplus. A Smith & Wesson M&P for $200 and some. The frame's worth more than that. Even if you have to replace the barrel and the recoil spring, which if you're buying a used handgun is probably a good idea anyway. All right, these are really good deals in surplus. No, not military surplus, not police surplus, but overstock style stuff. One right now, the Ruger American Gen 2 is a really good gun for a really good price. But there are some really sweet deals I've been seeing on Ruger American Gen 1s. Ruger American Gen 1 is a good rifle. It's a plastic push feed, but so are the vast majority of things on the market. So, it's a surplus. It's an overstock of the old inventory. That's just one example, but that's a really good one right now, the Gen 1 Ruger Americans. Talk about vomiting up on the market. Every year it seems like we're bombarded with several new rifle cartridges. The vast majority of those are going to die. They're going to die on the vine. Just going back in recent history. 223 Winchester Super Short Magnum. 25 Winchester Super Short Magnum. 300 Ultra Mag. And there's a bunch. There's just ones that come to mind. There are a bunch. And there's nothing wrong with the calibers. They just don't catch on. So many times, every year, the ones that don't catch on or are dying in a year or two, though guns in those calibers are going to be a decent bargain. They'll be on sale. Now, if you hand load, I wouldn't tell you if you don't hand load to go buy or go. This is way outdated. There aren't many of these. I don't think you'd find any new. But this example from a couple of years ago, unless you hand loaded, I would not tell you to buy a 25 WSSM. But if you hand load and you can get the brass because it just died, probably get enough brass to last you a lifetime. It's not like you're going out and doing an assault rifle class, a tactical carbine class in 25 WSSM. If you're going to hunt deer with it, and you're going to reload the other components once you have the brass that you can probably get a lifetime supply of fairly affordably, there's nothing wrong with that caliber for hunting whitetail. One right now, the 25 Creedmoor. You need another Creedmoor. The 6mm Creedmoor and the 6.5 Creedmoor weren't enough Creedmoor. You got to get one right in the middle of the 25 Creedmoor. And to be fair, it's a good caliber. It's good ballistically if you're hunting, medium-sized game, whitetail, antelope, coyote. Good cartridge for that. At least on paper. Now, is it going to catch on? I don't know. But if it dies in the next year or two, maybe you can get a good deal on those rifles. And again, if you reload, especially with that one, I don't know, but I imagine you could form the brass pretty easily out of 6 Creedmoor. That's just a theoretical example. But many times, one right now, maybe 6.8 Western. Maybe you could find a good deal on that. It's not dead, but it didn't take off. I think there's only the one ammo company, Browning Winchester, I think they're owned by the same people, that make ammo for it. But again, if you reload or you just want the ammo that they produce, maybe a good buy. If you expand what you think of as surplus. And again, stay away from these if you don't reload. But if you reload, it's less of a concern. Okay, going back to that military surplus from World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. There was a bunch of those on the market. People did not see them as rare or collectible, really. There were some that were. There were the rare variants, the jungle carbine, the sniper variants of different guns, the Finnish Mosins. Those were pretty collectible and highly sought after even pretty early on. But many of the mass-produced ones weren't, like an SMLE, just a general run-of-the-mill SMLE, or a 1903, which is a very good rifle. But when there were so many on the market, a lot of people were like, I'll chop it up. I'll sporterize it. Okay, well, let's look at that. An original matching serial number 1903 is not a great deal in surplus, but a sporterized one is. If you want a historically correct piece, you don't want a sporterized one. But if you want the attributes that made the 1903 Springfield a great rifle, and you want to shoot it and run it hard, then you probably do want a sporter if it was done well. And they're going to be a fraction of the cost. You can find one that still has really good iron sights, and or they did a really good job at drilling it and tapping it for common modern scope bases. Mounts. They did a really beautiful job of putting a really good stock on it. Maybe they even bedded and free floated the barrel. Well, that's probably going to be a better shooter than a military original. That's why they did it. It's going to be lighter, handier, maybe more accurate because it's free floated. And if you're going to shoot it, those are all pluses for you. Again, if you're a military collector, this is not your category. And I'm not telling you to get a 1903 original and sporterize it. What I'm saying is there are a bunch of sporterized 1903s, SMLEs, fill in your World War I, II, and Cold War, fill in the blank. If you can find a good sporterized one, and you're going to shoot it and you want it as a shooter, not as a military collector, that's a really good deal in surplus. Some of these are crazy good money. You find an SMLE that was sporterized. Find a 1903 that was sporterized. Take your pick of Mausers that were sporterized. Spanish Mausers, Argentine Mausers. A lot of people look down at those. They don't have the collector value, right? Because they don't have the German, stuff on there. But a lot of those Mausers, I'm not a historian, but many of those Mausers are made in Germany, even though they were made for South American countries or other countries. So I don't think they were any worse quality. So you might want to look at that. There's a bunch of those sporterized Mausers. There were even companies, I think, that sporterized them as companies. So they're like, consider them aftermarket upgraded by factories or arsenals, sporterized guns like Mausers. And the Mauser and the 1903 is a copy of the Mauser. Get mad at that if you want, but it is. The 1903 and the Mauser, in my opinion, are some of the best bolt-action designed, actions, period, ever in the history of mankind. If you can get one that's been modernized from the factory or modernized by a gunsmith or somebody that really knew what they were doing, and you want to shoot it, and you can get a really good deal on it, man, that's a plus. I was kicking around, looking at gun stuff, as you might imagine I do, one for content and two just because I like to, but I was kicking around on a Cabela's website today, and there was a 6.5x55 Swede Mauser that had been sporterized for, I think it was $4.99, and it was $100 off. So I'm not great at math, but That's around $400. All right, I can do that math. That's a crazy good deal for a controlled feed Mauser, already sporterized. It had a light, handy-looking stock. It still had the sights on it, really good sights. I mean, a 6.5 by 55, Swede is a fantastic cartridge. $400. That's a good deal. Talk about a really good deal if you want to get a young man into hunting or shooting or rifleman, becoming a rifleman with good iron sights and a good handy rifle and a good, mild-mannered gentleman of a cartridge. The 6.5 by 55 Swede, a Swedish Mauser, sporterized. It's fantastic. So again, not for everybody if you're a military collector, but if you're a shooter, man, there's some good deals in those. And lastly, I'm going to talk about a few that are actual old military surplus that are on the market right now. The Carcano. I've seen these pop up in the $200 range recently. The Carcano. It's still a 6.5, I think 6.5 by 54. They're not a bad gun. Are they a little bit heavy? Yeah, but what, World War II battle rifle was not heavy? Yeah, but they're a good gun. And people are like, oh, they're not that good because, again, they're common. People thought the same thing about SMLEs at the time. Pretty much anything that in America that wasn't American, that was a surplus on the market, people didn't really appreciate when there was a bunch of them. Mosin Nagants, Mauser 98s, right? At the time, they're coveted now, but at the time they weren't. The Carcano. That's one right now that you can find really good deals on. Don't turn your nose up at it if you want a military collector. If you're a shooter, I think there's better choices, largely because that caliber's not very common. But if you're a military collector, that's a good one. And another one that's been around for a few years, but you can still find them. They haven't hit that point where they're really, really coveted for what they are. The 7.5 Swiss straight pulls. And there's a bunch of different models and numbers of those. But if you want something a little bit different, you want something that's crazy well made with old world craftsmanship, there's few standing armies in history that have made stuff better than the Swiss. I've never held a Swiss rifle that I was like, kind of chintzy. You're just like fantastic craftsmanship on those rifles. So those Swiss straight pulls probably want to be a reloader. But the 7.5 by 55, it's in the 308-ish realm. It's a good potent caliber. If you don't mind the caliber, that's a really good deal. Now, they're not $90 or $79 like a Mosin used to be, but they're a much more finely crafted weapon than a Mosin is. So those are really good deals. The Carcano right now and the 7.5 Swiss straight pulls. Those are really good weapons for the money. So there are still some deals in surplus out there if that's your thing. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. I appreciate you guys. Tactical tip of the day. I don't always do a product and I'm not sponsored by these guys, but Renaissance wax. If you're going to shoot and take out and use and hunt with and use in the field one of these old classic guns, before they were using stainless steel barrels, before they were doing plastic stocks. Renaissance wax is really good for wood, protecting it against moisture, protecting it from, water and even worse, salt water getting into the wood. Renaissance wax. You can also use it on the exterior. You might just want to use oil, but if you're doing like really harsh conditions, you may look at Renaissance wax for the old, parkerized or blued steel and the wood. It's really good for that, Renaissance wax. So a little bit will last you a long time. Your tactical verse of the day. You probably know the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Well, Jesus says that. And that comes from Leviticus 19. Well, it comes from Jesus. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word. In the beginning was the Word. Was God, and the Word is God. Jesus always existed, right? He is God in the flesh. Anyway, that said, the first time it appears in the Bible is Leviticus 19. Also, a little bit later on in Leviticus 19, it says, "The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself." So you can ruminate on that theologically. I certainly have been for a while. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.